Hello, this is How to Save Humanity in 17 Goals, a podcast brought to you by Nature Careers in partnership with Nature Sustainability. I am Monica Contestabile, Chief Editor in Nature Sustainability. This is the series where we meet the researchers working towards the Sustainable Development Goals agreed by the United Nations and world leaders in 2015. Since then, in a huge global effort, thousands of academics have been using those targets to tackle the biggest problems that the planet faces today. Each episode ends with a sponsored slot from La Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food in Melbourne, Australia, where we hear about how its researchers are focusing on the SDGs. In this final bonus episode, we look at the communication strategy around the SDGs and meet the Swedish graphic designer who devised the highly recognizable icons and messaging that was so important in garnering international support.
Hello, my name is Jakob Trollbäck. I work with communication in different forms, which means copywriting and design and finding new ways to express information in a way that it's easier for people to understand. Our goal is to go from information to communication, so we have something to talk about. And I have an agency in Stockholm called The New Division, and we are working with very complex questions about sustainability and trying to build engagement for them in different ways. We're at a point today that we're facing a lot of challenges, but we do have a lot of solutions also. And to a high degree, what's missing is something that can take these solutions and activate them. We find that very often it's communication that's missing. So that's what we're working with. We have worked with sustainability for about 10 years now, starting with when we got the job to figure out a way to communicate the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So that was the start of our journey. Before we had the global goals, when we looked at the world, it was basically a world with problems everywhere. It was very hard to figure out where to start and what all of the issues are that we have to solve. The Sustainable Development Goals created 17 categories of these problems and made sure that they were very easy to separate different things. Separate poverty from education, from women's rights to biodiversity to climate change, etc. It was a way to try to make a map over all of the issues we have to solve to live a happy and prosperous life on the planet. And that was all well, and it's a fantastic framework, but it was also very hard to understand. There was a lot of words, a lot of complex sentences and paragraphs that could be half a page long. So our job was to try to figure out a way to do this as easy to understand as possible. So we wrote new names for all of the 17 goals, where we removed a lot of words and just focused it in on what the top level communication was, like the absolute minimum need to know about this goal. And then when we had gotten those short names, we were also thinking we need to have a visual representation so people can memorize them and talk about them and use them in conversations and online, etc. So we decided to create icons for each of the goals. So we created 17 icons, and we were playing a lot with colors, and in the end we decided that they all needed to have their own unique color, which is a bit of a challenge to find 17 distinct colors that also look great together, because the thing about the plan is that we can't just solve one of the goals. They're all interconnected in some way. So we wanted it to be able to make something that was beautiful from all of the goals, which became the circular logotype for the global goals. And we were driven a lot by if these goals actually is what can save us from a lot of hardship and a lot of problems that we have in the world, they should also be very likable goals. So we wanted to make them in bright colors. We wanted you to look at them and go, whoa, what's that? That looks fun. So the attitude of the whole thing was also a very important part. The job came to us in a very funny way. We had done some work for the BBC and they were happy with that. And they had a friend who needed some help with the project, and his name was Richard Curtis. And I had no idea who he was. And so he came to my office in New York, because my company, actually I started my first company in New York. And he introduced himself and said, do you know anything about what I've been doing? And I said no. And he said, well, I made some movies and some TV shows. Some of them are not so good and some are pretty decent. Like Love Actually, For Weddings and a Funeral, Notting Hill, Blackadder, Mr. Bean, etc. And I was, it was quite amazing because he's such a sweet and gentle and great guy. And I think that that's also something to take into this, that all of the work that he's doing and that we're trying to do is coming from a place of kindness and love and care, that we think that we can do something better. So we had actually a meeting about something else. He wanted help with a project that's called Red Nose Day, that everyone who lives in England knows about, and many others. And he wanted to launch that in the US and needed help with that. And we had a fantastic meeting. And when the meeting was over, he said, I have a crazy idea. Do you have 10 more minutes? So he was the first person who told me about the Sustainable Development Goals. And this was exactly a year before they were released. And they were still working on them. They hadn't really agreed on all the parts. They didn't even know how many goals there would be. Even though it was just a year away from the launch, there was still a lot of work to be done. And Richard said, I think this may be our last shot of fixing a lot of the things that's wrong with the planet. And I also think that these goals are going to fail if we can't make them popular. Do you want to help me? So there we were. We had decided that we would work on this project together with Richard Curtis, who had started this organization, Project Everyone, with the explicit goal of spreading the goals all over the world. So we needed to create sort of the design and communication system that his organization could take out in the world. I got an email in December of 2014, and it had the whole document of the goals. And to be able to work with this, we had to understand what it was. And I think that is actually a key point in this, that we didn't come from inside the organization. We came from the outside. And when you're working with communication, with media, with advertising, whatever it is, you always need to be able to put yourself in the clients, in the customers, in the receivers' shoes. So there we were, and we were thinking, how can we understand this? So there was a lot of just figuring out what are the words in this? How can we make this interesting to anybody, to a 7-year-old? How can anyone understand this? Or just about anyone? So I've since learned to think about communication sort of like when you're looking at a Google map on your computer or telephone, that you can zoom in on different levels. But at some level, if you're looking at a map, you need to know that, okay, this is in Latin America, this is in Europe. You need to have some basic sense of it. And then there's so much information, and you can zoom in from South America to Peru, to Lima, to hotels and restaurants. There's so much information. You just need to figure out which level you think that is a good entry point for everyone. So that's how we worked with all of the naming of the whole system. And sometimes there were people who were unhappy because we lost words in the top level, in the top layer that people cared a lot about. And we said that this is just the way that people are going to remember this. And then if they're interested in goal 5, for example, gender equality, then they can just open up that goal and they can see there, what do we mean by this? After we had the names almost locked, some of them changed during the process, during the design process also, they were going in parallel. Goal 14 with the fish with the 2 swirly waves on top of it, that was the first icon that I felt that that's really there. And here I have to mention Christina Rüegg-Grässli, my long-time design companion. She's Swiss, and we worked together for 20 years. And she's really the creative mastermind behind all of these icons. She sent me that fish, and I said, that's it. There were conversations about the fact that all the icons are silhouettes. Some people were wondering if they should be more 3-dimensional, and we wanted it to wanted everything to be as clear as possible. And some of the icons were hard to really figure out. And then some of them changed also because we learned more about the goals. At the UN, there were probably about 30 people in a communication hub that we had a dialogue with, and we learned a lot during that. I mean, I remember that the first picture for No Hunger had a fork in it, and someone just said, well, you know that 2/3 of the world's population don't use forks. It's like, oh, yeah, that's a good point. So, like, goal 6, which is clean water and sanitation, we thought that water was the important thing. And we did like a glass of water or something as an icon. And then immediately they said, oh no, this is a problem at some places, but sanitation, that's the real problem. We need you to put a toilet there. And we had made all of these beautiful icons, and I was like, we're not going to have a toilet in the middle of this. That's not going to happen. So we were trying to figure out how can we talk about sanitation without having a toilet. So number 7, which is for clean energy, we tried to get wind in, we tried to think about water, we obviously solar energy, and it became very complex. And then Christina just sent me this yellow square with a sun in it and said, can it be just a sun like this? And I looked at it and I was like, I know what to do. And I just put a power button in the middle of it. And I was like, oh yeah, now the sun has a power button. So that a lot of these icons had a very long journey where some, as I said, the fish, that was just instantaneous. And some went through a lot of iterations. And if there's 17 icons, I think that we must have done at least 500 icons in the process of doing this. And in the studio in New York, we had been working with branding for about 15 years. And you're pretty used to creating color palettes, but color palettes are usually 2, 3, or maybe 4 colors. And pretty soon we realized that no, we actually need to have 17 colors. And we were just sitting there like in silence and thinking, how is this possible? How can you make a 17 color palette? I would guess that it's one of the biggest color palettes that has been made for, if we're calling this system for a brand, something for a communication system. So that took a couple of months. And I remember, I'm sad that I don't have a photograph, but my office was just full on just printouts of colors on the floor everywhere. There were just hundreds of sheets and that we walked around and looked at. But then we had the colors and we had started to arrange the system in a graphic way. And 17 is a prime number, which means that it's very hard to make. It's not divisive by anything other than 17 and 1. So you can actually make a pyramid of 17 pieces, but that wasn't very practical. So we had this grid that had 3 rows of 6, and then we had an empty space. And this thing of just trying to make things better, trying to always strive for excellence, to me that little square at the end was just an affront to all that I believed in. It was like, it looked like the system wasn't finished. It looked like we hadn't read. I was very unhappy about that. And then we said that, but wait a minute, shouldn't the whole system have a logotype? Something that keeps it all together. And we started to think about different visual representations of that. And then Christina sent over this sketch that had just 17 segments of a cake or something arranged in a circle. And we said, well, this can be the sun, it can be the earth, it can be harmony, it can be whatever it is. It shows that these are all stick together. And we had done this logotype, and then it it took me a day or two when I all of a sudden realized that is going to be the 18th square. And that was one of the most joyful moments in the whole process for me, that I just, now we have a grid. It makes sense. 17 goals. The 18th one is a logotype in the name. So that was, it sounds silly, but that was a big moment for me. So the launch was actually to the day, I believe, 1 year from the time that Richard Curtis walked into my office. And we were all very happy and proud of the work. Richard loved it, the UN loved it, we loved it. We felt a lot of hope. And there was a big launch with huge projections of the goals of the UN building, and a lot of social media being pumped out. And Global Citizen had a huge show in Central Park with, Beyonce and Coldplay and etc. And it was the whole stage for the global goals. So there was a lot of focus on it. So I think the launch was very successful, and I think that it's actually, I have a hard time gauging how many people really know about the goals, because I'm surprised that I still meet people who don't quite know what they are or haven't heard about them. World Economic Forum had this survey 5 years ago that said 74% of the adults globally are aware of them. It's just a little bit high to me, but I mean, that's what it says, meaning that we can say that at least half of the people in the world knows about them. And Richard has a great saying, which is, you can't fight for your rights if you don't know what they are. And I think that that's why we really have to make sure that these goals continues to be used, because they are sort of they are, and even though there's only 6 years left of the 15 years, they still are the underpinning, a friend of mine said, the oxygen for all conversations about sustainability. So it doesn't matter if the years goes on, this is a solid framework to understand almost all issues about sustainability. To me, the passion is in life, right? And that maybe sounds a bit trite, but if you look around and you see the forces of everything growing, everything happening, you see it in nature, you see it with humans. I have 2 kids. You see how their bodies grow, you see how their minds grow, and I feel like we're in such a unique position on this planet where we should always strive to do things the very best way, because the very best way is part of survival. It's part of how we enjoy ourselves. It's part of how we do things smarter, so we have time for other things than only working. It's always about finding solutions to me. The reason why I am so passionate about working with sustainability, it's because it's all about finding the best way of doing something. So if you're starting a successful company and you're making a lot of money, but then you poison some rivers as you're doing this, well, that's not very elegant. There should be a better way. There should be a way for us to do something without having negative effects. if you're successful in what you're doing, you should be able to be successful without it costing harm to other people. You should always find a more elegant way of doing things. And I think that that's what we owe to the earth, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to humankind, to always look for something smarter, something better. These are all things that we know makes our lives better. And I think that as soon as we see that picture and start to realize that we can do things better and we owe it to ourselves, to our friends, to our families, to our children, to always look for a better solution, then it becomes not only obvious, but it becomes something that's really exciting.
Well, that's it for this series, How to Save Humanity in 17 Goals. But before we go, next up, we'll hear for the final time how researchers at La Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food in Melbourne, Australia, the sponsor of this series, are working towards the targets set by the UN.
I'm Karis Bazaka, and welcome to this podcast series from the La Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food at La Trobe University in Australia. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands where La Trobe University campuses are located in Australia, and to pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, as well as to elders past, present and emerging. Across this 6-episode series, you will hear from academics at the top of their fields as they discuss groundbreaking research happening at the La Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food, also known as LISAF. Through LISAF, La Trobe has developed a holistic approach to food security, and this paddock-to-gut philosophy is delivering innovative research and significant academic and industry partnerships across the entire value chain. Its success so far can already be seen in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, which measure university performance against the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. In 2024, La Trobe was ranked first in Australia and 5th globally for SDG 2, Zero Hunger. Now stay tuned to hear firsthand about the research of LISAF as it delivers innovative solutions for sustainable and nutritious food production in a resource and climate-constrained world.
We're used to using digital tools now in our everyday lives, so we use computers and devices, and so does agriculture.
That is Associate Professor Kim Johnson, a plant biologist and one of the researchers at La Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food, talking about digital agriculture.
We might think of some on-farm technologies that they're using digital devices, so to collect and store data related to the farm. This might be sensors where they test the soil moisture levels, satellite images that see the greenness of a crop, or the soil carbon measurements. There's lots of on-farm technologies which are getting lots and lots of data, but also beyond the farm, we're thinking about the energy use, the markets, who's actually wanting to buy these products, and the logistics and transport of getting them to and from places. So digital agriculture collects all that data and all that information and helps decision-making for the farmers. We know that farmers are really intuitive, right? They know their farms so well, but they have to make really complex decisions about when to plant, what's cultivar, and why and when. And it's becoming increasingly difficult with climate challenges to make those decisions. So now they can use data to support those decisions and validate them, and also find parts of their farm which maybe are not as productive. So they might make a decision and say, look, we're not going to do wheat this year. It's not going to be profitable. The climate's just not suitable for that crop this year. We're going to try something else. And they can model that using the data that they've already collected.
At LISAF, Associate Professor Johnson says they are focusing quite heavily on phenotyping, which is the analysis of plant traits into quantifiable terms, mostly through the study of images. It helps scientists understand a plant's interaction with the environment and select those plants with the best genetics for desired outcomes. And Associate Professor Johnson says it can complement genomics, which is the study of an organism's genes.
In the past, we've really had this genomics revolution. So we have a lot of genomic data about all our different plants and animals, but what's taken a bit longer to collect is this imaging data and interpreting all these images that can help support us think about what those plants or animals look like, how they're behaving, and the valuable traits that we're looking for, like yield and disease resistance. It's now matching up that imaging data with the genetics so that we can really select plants and animals that are going to perform best in different environments.
One area where this phenotyping and genomics research is being used is in the growth area of protected cropping, which refers to plants being grown in closed environments.
It can range anything from a net to protect from pests and disease, all the way to these very, very advanced, completely closed vertical farms and everything in between, like glass houses. These are being used because they're highly productive. So you can get a lot more out of your crops in this very small area because you're controlling that environment. And again, as the environment becomes increasingly uncertain, farmers are moving towards some of these protected cropping environments, particularly for high-value crops like tomatoes and berries.
As Professor Bassick mentioned in an earlier episode, places like the Netherlands have really embraced protected cropping, which has enabled a country with a small landmass to be hugely productive in horticulture. At LISAF, there's a dedicated research hub for protected cropping to develop plants that will thrive in closed environments.
For the next 5 years, we're focusing on this protected cropping hub and building that industry. Protected cropping is becoming increasingly of interest to farmers, but one of the major challenges is the plants are not adapted to being in these closed environments. So we have to then breed them using our advanced genomics and phenotyping and select the best plants for those environments, but then also think about how we can manipulate that environment, because now we're doing this in controlled lighting, controlled temperature, so we can make the plant think any time of year that it's in the best climate for its growth. So we're trying to make incredibly efficient plants for these protected cropping environments. We're really trying to think about sustainability while we're doing this, especially around that resource use. So minimizing energy use, recycling water and nutrients so that they're really sustainable, but also the plant material or waste that we're value adding from that and using that material for other applications. And that might be things like pharmaceutical bioactives or new composting materials. And that's, again, the advantage of these protected cropping environments is that because they're closed, you can have much more sustainable systems. They use much less water than broadacre cropping, and you can track and only give the plants exactly what they need in terms of those fertilizers, so you're not using too much.
Another important aspect of protected cropping is that food can be produced locally.
We know that food miles is a really critical issue in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. So we want to be able to reduce that by having food grown in these vertical farms, maybe on your roof or really locally, so you can get that fresh produce. And that also means you can do it in really challenging environments as well.
This research is being applied to some very challenging environments, even ones not on Earth.
One of the most extreme climates that we're looking at is space and off-Earth growing of plants. So I'm part of this program called Plants for Space. It's a big national program across Australia, but also with lots of international partners, space industries and space agencies. And some of the researchers within Plants for Space are part of LEAF project. So this is Lunar Effects on Agricultural Flora. And this is a mission that is planned on Artemis 3. So there will be a payload designed to take plants and deploy them, if possible, onto the moon in 2026. This is only a few years away, so it's so exciting that soon we will have plants deployed to the moon.
The LEAF project brings together an international group of partners. It includes a core group from the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence in Plants for Space, also known as P4S, who are headquartered at the University of Adelaide. It's led by Space Lab Technologies and involves the University of Adelaide, La Trobe University and NASA Kennedy Space Centre, or P4S partners, as well as the United States Department of Agriculture, University of Colorado Boulder and Purdue University, with additional analysis at the P4S node at the University of Western Australia. Associate Professor Johnson says this collaboration between researchers and industry experts is critical.
It's so important that we're always working with industry so that we're really focused on what the industry needs and we're not trying to solve problems that don't even exist. So industries such as the medicinal agriculture, horticulture industry, food applications. With Plants for Space, we're working very closely with the space agencies and space enablers so that when we can test, we're able to actually send things into space, but also do a lot of ground testing on Earth and learn from the many years of experience of people working in this area.
This work around digital agriculture also addresses UN SDG 2, Zero Hunger.
Part of that is through this protected cropping hub, where we're focusing on that sustainability aspect. So we want to be able to grow food as efficiently as possible in a smaller area of land as possible so that we can maintain the biodiversity in other areas and we're not having to clear land and have such a strong environmental effect.
The biggest obstacle with digital agriculture is just the sheer amount of data.
Numbers are meaningless if you don't have a question that you're trying to answer. Another challenge is people with the skills to actually interpret that data, analyse it, ask the right questions, know the farm systems so that they have a real on-farm specific question that they're trying to solve. And that's a big challenge, is that skilled workforce that we need in digital agriculture who have skills in machine learning. The way I see digital agriculture and AI and machine learning is really supporting the farmers in their decision making. So they may be giving 10 options that the farmer can then work through and use their experience to say, right, that looks like a really great option for my situation. Now I have the information and data to support that. This is the way I'm going to go.
It means there's a lot of potential career opportunities in the agriculture and food production space too.
Something I'm really quite passionate about is people coming into this workforce. There's such a huge opportunity for future careers in this area. We want people with digital skills, people who are really good at working with other people. We want people with those transferable skills, even if it's good communication skills, good writing skills, data analytics, computational, robotics. We want all of you. We want you to come in and be part of our agriculture community and support sustainable food production for everyone.
That was Associate Professor Kim Johnson, a plant biologist and researcher at La Trobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food. This also marks the end of the final episode in this series. For more information on La Trobe University and the work of LESAF, visit their website, www.latrobe.edu.au/research/LISAF. Thanks for listening.